Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. I'm Nick Park. I'm taking us through a set of messages on the great prayers of the Old Testament. And we're seeing how God took his people on this great journey of prayer that they would know him better and see his power at work. And our prayer is that as we explore these great prayers in the Old Testament, God will take us on a similar journey. Now, we're in the book of Psalms. And in Psalm 22, David cries out in agony to the Lord. He's in a bad place. He feels like God has abandoned him. Now, intellectually, David knows that's not true. Theologically, he knows that's not true. He knows that God has made a covenant with him. He knows that God is steadfast. He knows that God is faithful and true to his word. But in his heart, he feels abandoned. And maybe you've been in that place yourself, where in your head, you know God is with you, but in your heart, you feel lost, you feel alone, you feel abandoned. That's where David's at. So what should he do? Should he keep quiet about it? Should he just keep saying the right things and hope that eventually his feelings catch up with that? Would it be blasphemous for David to tell God how he's really feeling? To say, Lord, I feel like you've abandoned me. Well, he writes it down in a prayer and a song that ends up in our book of Psalms. You know what I'm thinking, that sometimes there are critics who will pick out the words of songs, who will criticize them and say why they're not correct. Every pastor has dealt with people coming up saying, I don't like that song, that word, that line's terrible. Well, them kind of people must have had a field day whenever David began Psalm 22 by saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? But you know what? As you read on through the psalm, you find that David's despair didn't have the last word. And his song, his prayer, moves into faith in God. It starts off with him feeling abandoned. It starts off with him asking God a very raw, honest question. My God, why have you forsaken me? And then it becomes a prayer of faith that still shares his pain and shares his heartache and all the stuff he's going through, but says he believes that God's got something better ahead. Well, the song, it made the cut. It became part of Scripture. It ended up in the Bible. I'm sure over the centuries, people wondered about how you could have a song in the Bible that begins by saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Well, centuries later, God comes in human flesh to earth to deal with the very evil, sin, all the injustice, the stuff that David was crying out against in this psalm. The way that God does that is by coming as Jesus Christ, God the Son, second person of the Trinity. And he takes that sin and he takes that injustice and he takes all of the sense of abandonment that people feel, and he carries it on his shoulders on the cross on our behalf. And when he's on the cross, something absolutely incredible happened. God the Son prays David's prayer. He cries out from the cross the first line of Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? And then as God the Son continues in his suffering on the cross, we realize that David's psalm, David's prayer of feeling abandoned was actually a prophecy, because it contains lines that deal directly with what happened to Jesus on the cross, being surrounded by people mocking him, surrounded by his foes, tormented by thirst, his bones being out of joint, his hands and feet pierced, and even people casting lots for his garments. All of that took place when he was on the cross. You know, it finishes, of course, in triumph, as Jesus on the cross finishes by shouting out, it is finished, it's done. But you know what that tells me? It tells me that it's okay to tell God when you're feeling bad. God's not going to rebuke you and say, how dare you feel that way. God hears your heart cry. He wants you to come through to a point of faith where you'll believe that God's going to turn it around, that there's something better coming. But it's okay to tell God how you're feeling. And that's the great lesson of David's great prayer where he was abandoned, and then it became a great prayer of faith, and then it became a more wonderful prophecy when we heard it from the lips of Jesus himself. Thank you for joining us for this lesson on the great prayers of the Old Testament. Join us again next time for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.